Hi, this is Harold Ross. Thanks for joining me. This video is to introduce you to our new Smoke Brushes panel, which makes the use of my smoke brushes much easier, and it also gives you more creative control. Having a wisp of smoke coming out of a candle that has just been blown out, or possibly even coming out of a cup of coffee or tea, can be a beautiful additional touch to a still life image. Back in the day, when I was doing commercial work, I was shooting transparency film, often 8x10, and it was a big challenge trying to create aesthetically pleasing actual smoke in an image. There were chemicals that we could use in the studio that would create smoke, and of course there were smoke machines, but capturing it perfectly was an adventure in frustration, time, and expense, as 8x10 Polaroid material and 8x10 transparency film were very, very costly. I actually ended up developing a process where I would pull a cotton ball apart into beautiful wispy strands, and then I would stick that to a non-reflective black board, which I would then insert into the still life. I would then light paint that using a diffusion filter over the lens, essentially double exposing it onto the same piece of film. This was much more controlled, but it also took quite a bit of experimentation. Fortunately, today, using Photoshop, we can easily apply smoke with a smoke brush. I know that you've seen smoke brushes. There are lots of them out there. But Ian on my team has taken it to another level. We've now created a panel that contains my smoke brushes and allows you to use them more easily and with a lot more creative control. Each of these 11 brushes was created by me, and additionally, I masked each one for added depth. Okay, so let me demonstrate and go over the features of the panel using one of my images as a base image. Keep in mind that we always want to work in a non-destructive way. So the smoke would always be applied to an empty layer, which can be altered later through transformation, masking, or opacity. Notice that in the lower section of the panel, which I'll come back to later, we have the very important Create a New Layer button. This is a very fast and easy way of creating a layer to stamp the smoke onto. You'll see that the button automatically names the layer for us. We want to create the new layer at the very top of the layer stack so it isn't affected by any adjustment layers, etc. Select the top layer and click the New Layer button on the panel. Notice the name. Now that we have the new layer, let me go through the functions of the panel. In the top third of the panel, we see a preview window, which, unless we have a brush selected, shows a logo. But when we select a brush, we then get a quick preview of the shape of that brush. We can either navigate to other brushes using the buttons, or by using the slider just below the buttons to choose between all 11 brushes. In the middle section of the panel, we have quite a few functions. The top slider is for brush size. Obviously, sliding this allows us to get a quick change of brush size that we can preview by hovering over the image. Remember that you can always transform a brush larger or smaller later, but this is a very quick way to get it in the ballpark. Secondly, we have brush angle control. This wouldn't be used very often, but this would allow us to rotate the brush prior to stamping it. And here's that preview. I'll change the angle, and here's that preview. And this one is just right. By the way, the sliders are very much like Capture One sliders. When we double-click on a slider, it goes back to the default position. So here I've rotated the angle, and here's the preview on that, but if I want to get back to 0, I just double-click the slider. The same is true of the slider for the brush size. Then, below the brush angle slider, we can do a quick vertical flip, or we can do a quick horizontal flip. Again, although the vertical flip is used rarely, the horizontal flip is very, very useful when trying to find a brush shape that might fit the negative space better. All of these settings can be taken right back to default by simply pressing the Reset button on the bottom right of the middle section. Always keep in mind that we can distort the smoke brush using tools in the lower section of the panel. Now let's look at the lower section. Of course, we've already touched on the New Layer button. The second button over is simply a free transform tool. This is here in case you want to make a size change after, say, masking or any other changes that you might have made to the smoke. Of course, you can make the smoke thinner or wider in relation to the height. The third button is a warp tool. This is very handy because often we need to change the shape of the smoke a bit to either match our concept or possibly to help balance the composition better. In this case, I felt that the smoke might appear as though it is moving toward a window, the same window that is causing light to hit the background. So in this case, I would warp it slightly to the left and see how it looks. If you distort or warp the smoke and then you feel it's either too large or too small, you can always go back to that second free transform button and correct the size. And then finally, we have a slider for layer opacity. This is just a quick and easy way to reduce the opacity of the layer. It's often a bit too much to use the smoke layer at 100% opacity, but it really depends on your background brightness as well as the relative brightness of the subjects. I would just be careful not to dim it so much that you lose depth within the smoke itself. Now I'd like to show you a really great feature of the panel. The panel, very much like my light painting panel, has built-in tutorials. We get to those through the hamburger menu here, and those tutorials are broken down to cover the different sections of the panel. There is also a video on masking the smoke for more depth if you wish to do that. One nice thing about my brushes is that I've already masked each brush for depth, so you really don't need to do that, but if you want to play with it, we've included a tutorial for that. So that covers the panel for the smoke brushes. If you already own my smoke brushes, you can add the panel at a very low cost. If you haven't purchased them yet and are planning on doing so, you'll get the panel as part of the package. One nice thing is that with normal brushes, like my original smoke brushes, you have to go through the trouble of installing them, and if they ever disappear because of a Photoshop update or you change computers, all you have to do is reinstall the plugin and the smoke brushes are automatically installed in Photoshop for you. So it really does provide a lot of convenience. Thank you very much for watching. This is Harold Ross.